Back to another video. Purple Political Talk here. Today is Saturday, May 18th, 2024, and we're going to be looking at our first video in the 2024 presidential election cycle. And we're going to be looking at the latest polling numbers, which show Donald Trump as the leader in the national polls and a lot of swing state polls, and discuss what that really means in the context of the entire race. But before we do begin, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you're up to date with all our 2024 election content. So without further ado, let's begin. So when we look at polling averages, since, for example, I like using FiveThirtyEight because they, aggregate the polls really well, have, pretty good user interface. Since FiveThirtyEight started aggregating polls back in March, Donald Trump has been in the lead in the national polls, if in the polling averages. Mind you, there has been moments, especially most of April was really tight, but, you're considering looking at a race nationally within 1 point. Mind you, national polls aren't the be all of the election, because ultimately the election is not decided nationally. Now, what's the important thing to note, though, with these national polling averages? They include RFK. RFK has been polling at around 10% nationally, according to some polls, higher in some, of course, and lower in some. I would like to say that RFK would likely have a bit less of an impact on the actual elections as we get closer. I sort of doubt the impact that he would have on the election, and we're going to talk about him specifically, but the point still stands. Trump is leading in the national polls. Now, when we look at the electoral map, and I'm going to be making an electoral prediction soon, my first prediction for the 2024 year, but you're frankly looking at an election that's going to be decided by, 6 or 7 states. Your Sunbelt states of North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, and Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. There's some other states here that you can consider, like, if they're right now, like, safe red, I don't think they're necessarily going to be safe red. I think some of these states, like, are going to go by lesser margins, but generally speaking, the states in gray are going to be your states that are going to be the deciding factors in the election. But what is the big trend that we're seeing amongst these states? Let's take a look at Arizona, for example. Donald Trump has consistently been leading in the polls. Mind you, you're starting to get to the point where the polls are well within the margin of error. But, in recent polls, you have Trump up by 6, Trump up by 9, Trump up by 7. In some polls you have Trump by Biden up by 1. But generally speaking, you're consistently seeing polls where Trump is up, and by a considerable margin. But, when you look at this, I think one of the first things you have to clearly say is there is a good chunk of undecided voters, and that might play a somewhat influential role in what ends up happening. But you also see that within these averages, Donald Trump leads by higher margins when there are more people in the race. So if you do a 1p1 comparison, for example, this New York Times Siena poll has, a Trump v. Biden, 1-to-1 matchup, 43-49 in Arizona. Compare that to a Trump v. Biden versus Kennedy v. Stein map state in West. You see that Biden's support comes down by, almost 8 points, and then Donald Trump's only comes down by 5. So I think that one of the biggest things that you can see, and you can see this across all the states, when it comes to third-party voters, and people that might end up voting for Kennedy or another third-party candidate, it is more likely that they would be coming out of the Joe Biden column of voters. And when you discuss this in the context of the election, if I were the Biden campaign, I would be sounding alarms all across. Why? Joe Biden cannot afford to lose anyone from his coalition. The reality is that in 2020, Joe Biden, he won by a considerable electoral college margin, but it was frankly only a couple 100,000 votes to end up deciding the election. In some states, it was as little as 10 or 15,000 votes. So if you're Joe Biden, you can't be affording to losing some of these people that were probably in the middle to RFK. And I think it's something that's showing a lot of data we have currently that Biden is more likely to lose support if the if people actually end up voting for third-party candidates. But again, Trump is in the lead, in Arizona. So let's put that in the column for Trump. And we're going to see how the national trends kind of really show what's going on in all these states. And I want to take a look at Georgia, for example. We have Trump leading by 6 points. Again, we don't have a lot of consistent polling from the state of Georgia, but, and mind you, some of these polls, like this poll right here, is a partisan poll, so you have Trump up by 10, Trump up by 8, but, the New York Times CNN poll, again, you have a very small, pool of voters, but again, Trump up by 8, Trump up by 9. You have other polls here showing Trump up by 2, Trump up by 6, but again, generally speaking, you're seeing Trump ahead in the polls. And I think that comes from the fact that we're still super far out from the election. And we have to remember that the further we are from the election, the greater amount of undecided voters there will be. And look, I think it's been very clear that Donald Trump's base is very, very enthusiastic. I think there hasn't been a base as enthusiastic for a candidate, in many years. And many of Trump's base, they're going to vote for him no matter what. When it comes to Biden and his coalition, it does not have as many people that are, super excited to vote for Biden. It's not that same sort of enthusiasm. I think a lot of people, they're voting for Biden, especially a lot of Democrats, kind of out of obligation, for the party, and they want to defeat Donald Trump. But it's not that same level of enthusiasm. So when you look at, people that are completely decided, I think, that's why you're going to have Donald Trump up in a lot of cases. When it comes to voting amongst independents, then that's where the election is truly going to be decided. Remember, your base is very important because, frankly, if your base doesn't go out and vote, then you're pretty much done for because, if your base isn't excited to vote for you, why would independents be excited to vote for you? But then independent voters are truly who win the election. You have to convince the people in the middle ground to come in and vote for you. And I think that in part explains why Donald Trump has consistently been having a lead in a lot of these polls. But again, I think an important thing to realize is that he's a lead in the polls. And I'm going to show you something very interesting. If you compare Donald Trump's popularity compared to Joe Biden's popularity right now, Joe Biden is currently disapproved 17 points, like 17 points disapprove, right? Compare that to Donald Trump's favorability ratings. Donald Trump only has a 12% unfavorability rating. So you're looking at 5 points less when it comes to favorability. So, that begs the question, what role and what are the key driving issues in this election? And I think looking at what voters are really caring about, you're looking at a lot of voters caring about the economy, in some cases immigration, but for those independent voters who are going to be deciding factors in the election, you're looking at independent at the economy. And a lot of polling has come out and said, especially amongst independents, they trust Donald Trump with the managing of the economy more than they do Biden. And I think that's a driving factor also is why you're seeing Donald Trump in the lead. And I think, frankly, there's other factors at play, like the third party votes and all these other things. But the fact still stands. Trump is in the lead. And in part, I think it's because of the economy. I think the economy is a very important issue when it comes to this election. For Biden, he really will have a tough time pushing other issues like the abortion issue, which was the winning issue for Democrats in 2022 when it comes to stopping that red wave. He's going to have a hard time pushing that if the economy is doing poorly. And frankly, the economy is like 9 times out of 10 the number one issue for a lot of voters. And, the trend of Donald Trump leading in the polls in these swing states, Michigan, very tight, but again, Trump is leading. Although in some recent polls, Biden has gotten the lead. But again, Trump is leading in these averages. This is bound to change eventually, I think, in some of these states like Michigan. I do see Biden taking the lead, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in my election prediction video. But, in a lot of these swing states, Nevada, Trump has a 6-point lead. I mean, I think the consistency of Trump's leads across a lot of these states should be a big warning sign for Democrats. If Democrats look at this election as, why would anyone vote for Donald Trump? And they kind of use the same mentality they did in 2016, which is ultimately what won them the election. I think that undoubtedly the biggest factor in them losing the election in 2016 was underestimating Donald Trump. And I think potentially they could be on track to doing the same thing. You know, look, I think the fact of the matter is Donald Trump's candidacy as a whole right now stands on very shaky legs. I think the big foundation it has is, I think, the economy issues and things like that, and the support of a strong base. But a lot of the political polarization, and especially what ends up happening a lot with a lot of these criminal cases, you know, which, you know, Trump's base really looks as completely unfair cases, and, you know, cases that are, you know, ultimately won't matter when it comes to their vote. Some independents might consider those cases a big factor in how they vote. But, you know, even then, we have to remember that Donald Trump is, I would say, one of the most resilient candidates in American history, because of how many scandals, how many different issues he's been able to, you know, not only avoid and overcome, but like come out ahead from them. I mean, there's too many to list at this point. I mean, his resiliency as a candidate, I think, is something that is going to be a big factor in this election. And ultimately, people are not happy with Joe Biden. I think you can see that clearly with his favorability ratings. People are happy with his management of the economy. People are not happy with his management of immigration, generally speaking. So, especially in a lot of these states, you know, the Rust Belt is an area of the country that is struggling economically. And they benefited a lot during Trump's presidency. Again, and we're looking at different issues. I think, frankly, Donald Trump could have won the election in 2020 really easily if it wasn't for COVID-19. COVID-19, I think, was what ended up, you know, shifting a couple of those 1,000 voters that ended up, you know, shifting towards Joe Biden and, you know, winning him the election. But now that COVID-19 is not an issue, I think we're back to economy as well. And even in 2020, COVID-19, the economy was in disarray. So yes, it was a big consideration as well. But the economy and America's role is really going to be top of mind issue. And the Democrats need to find a way, if they want to win this election, to find a way to contrast what they've done for the economy to what Trump has done for the economy in a positive way. And if you're the Democrats, that's a pretty tough task right now, because you're the ones in power, and generally speaking, the economy is doing poorly. Yes, you've seen some increases in the stock market, but, you know, ultimately inflation, yes, inflation may be down year to year, but in the minds of American voters, you know, they see the inflation as, you know, when Trump was president, you know, I would pay $1.79 for gas. Now I pay $3, for example. So even if you look at, you know, if the Democrats have a pretty tough task, and ultimately, even if the Democrats put out these, you know, very politically advantageous graphs for them by, you know, changing some of the things that, for example, putting inflation year to year, that's not going to matter in the minds of voters, for example. So, because again, it's going to be memory. I think a lot of voters, especially in the Rust Belt, especially in the Sun Belt, are going to be voting based on memory. This election ultimately, I think, is up in the air. Donald Trump is in the lead right now, but I wouldn't say he's the clear front runner. And the reason I avoid saying that is, you know, it's a long time from here to November, and there are a lot of factors that I think are going to come into play in this election, and Donald Trump's candidacy is on shaky legs. I don't think, and frankly, Biden's is too. I don't think Biden's building the excitement that he needs nationwide to end up winning the election. But Trump has a big task, which is, how does he build a coalition? And frankly, part of that coalition will come from some minorities that might vote increasingly, even if it's a couple of points more towards Trump. But he needs to bring back some of those people in the middle, some of those independent voters that might have voted for Joe Biden, bring him back to his column. So, you know, that's where I think these polls show that really interesting perspective, that Trump is in the lead. Mind you, nationally, it's a very small lead, but again, Republicans usually don't lead in these polls nationally, but we're still very far out, and they have a big amount of voters that are still too close to be decided. But I want to know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think that these polls are going to be a clear indicator of what's going to end up happening in November? Do you think that Donald Trump is currently in the lead? What do you think is the role that RFK will play in this race? You know, I think it's clear, at least from based on the data we have currently, with third-party candidates in the race, Biden loses support. But I want to hear more about what you think down in the comments, and stay on the lookout for my presidential prediction video coming out real soon. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please make sure to give it a big like and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to be up to date with our latest content about the 2024 presidential election. So thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.